been in the news quite a bit lately, sort of talking about the province's current position on using masks for healthcare, but not necessarily using them for everybody else. I think it's to do with saving them or conserving the N95 masks primarily, but any comment on that? All right. Okay, could we then have, we should actually better practice to have the items on the table before we discuss them, but I'm sorry I didn't do that. So Councillor Myers, can you move our correspondence, please?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Is everyone, sorry, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Hughes. Be it resolved that all of the proposed resolutions shown in section 4, correspondence of the agenda, be approved and adopted by council in the order that they appear on the agenda and sequentially numbered.
Thank you. All in favor of the correspondence on the agenda? Okay, I see everybody hands up, so we'll move on to the next item. These are items of business. So the first item of business is the memorandum from the clerk, Jackie Mellon, regarding a procedural bylaw amendment to allow electronic meetings during a declared emergency. Reeve Doncaster, can you please move our memorandum onto the table?
Certainly. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Fitton. Be it resolved that report number 2020-clerk-001 entitled Procedural Bylaw Amendment to Allow Electronic Meetings During a Declared Emergency be received. I guess I'll do the rest of it. That Council for the Town of Deep River hereby resolves that notice is hereby given to amend the procedural bylaw to permit meetings to be conducted electronically during a declared emergency in accordance with the Municipal Act. That Council for the Town of Deep River, in accordance with Bill 187, hereby authorizes staff to prepare amendments to bylaw 53-2014, being a bylaw to regulate the proceedings of the Council of the Town of Deep River to incorporate the use of electronic media for the conducting of meetings, and that a bylaw to amend bylaw number 53-2014 be presented to Council for approval. Thank
you. Does everybody understand the amendment for the procedural bylaw? I believe Councillor Hughes has, you may have a amendment to that motion, Councillor Hughes. You did attend some training on it.
Put the mic on.
Yep.
Just a couple of additional things that are related that we might want to think about, and it's not something that needs to be finalized necessarily tonight, but listening to a couple of podcasts on the AMO website around this, which was various representatives from municipalities who've already had their first meetings, and as well as some AMO staff and other people like Fred Dean, just with some suggestions about the kinds of things we should think about, as well as what our procedural bylaw amendment covers. And I guess the two things are to remember that allowing electronic participation doesn't mean we don't still need transparency and public access to our meetings. And as challenging as that is, we need to find ways to just make that happen. And one of the things I emphasized was just document everything you're doing, and make sure you communicate whatever you're doing to the public. So the two things I guess that they talked about as being pretty important were just to make sure you tell the public how they're going to access your meeting. So one sort of amendment I'm thinking of is, and it's really just telling them that no, they can't come in because buildings are closed. And this was what they discussed at the AMO at this webinar. I mean, that applies to everyone. You can't come to the meeting because the buildings are closed. And here's how you access our meeting, which I think in this case is going to be a recording on YouTube. Is that correct?
Correct.
Jackie? Yeah. So it's really just making sure that we very formally communicate that to the public in all of the forums that we have. And the other thing was they talked about how councils need to think about how you want to handle delegations. Because we do have that in our bylaw that has the whole process. And I think what they talked about mainly was the option of just asking for written, but some very, big councils might do things like having delegations participate electronically. I don't think we want to go there. Most of the smaller ones were talking about written delegations only. But again, we need to decide that and tell the public that that's the process. And that's what they emphasize. Just make sure you're communicating your what you're doing. So I guess to that, I'm not sure if the amendment to this motion is the best way or if it should be standalone, but what I was thinking of is just that we add further that staff be directed to provide notice to the public that attendance at council meetings is not possible due to closure of the municipal building, and to provide information on the process to access council proceedings. So however staff wants to do that, but just the motion says that we need to tell the public they can't come in and how they can access our meetings. And the second would be that staff provide a recommendation to council could be the next regular meeting, April 8th, I don't know, regarding changes to the process for public input to council matters and any required revisions. So what do we want to say about delegations, and do we need to make that change to our bylaw as well? So those were the two sort of amendments I was going to put forward for this motion. So I guess that's an official request for an amendment. I don't know.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes.
We would need a seconder for that, or
I know we do have a request coming up, I think, from a group that wants to undertake the community safety and well-being plan, and they may ask to be a delegation at our April 22nd meeting. So we are going to, and we do have Mr. Whitehead here who's kind of making a presentation to council electronically. So I personally don't have an issue with if there's only one or two delegations or presentations to let them be able to be make a written presentation or delegation, but also attend electronically. But I don't know if others have I would support that, but I don't know that that's supported by others. There's Councillor McLaren.
Yeah, I support that too, because Mr. Whitehead's going to do it. It's just a simple way to do it. And when he is finished, or any delegation is finished, then Jackie can just eliminate them from the rest of the meeting, right?
Yeah.
Simple. And we send out notice through the
Councillor
paper how
Hughes, does
meetings
that work
can be
with
attended.
your amendment? Is that appropriate to include in the amendment at this time, to include the allowance for electronic participation by delegations?
I don't know. I guess I would, all the recommendation is, and probably we would need a seconder probably before to put those on the table, but I don't know if we want to decide that now. It might be worth, the recommendation is just to go away and find a recommendation. I don't know. It's a bit odd when you think about it. If we're allowing a delegation, and for this matter, the press, and it's interesting, and at the AMO webcast, I didn't hear anyone talk about how they were going to include the press, which was unfortunate. But why does that then not mean that any member of the public can ask to participate? I just think we need to think about what that might mean. I don't know.
Well, I think there's a difference between participating as a member of the public to observe and participating that you've applied to be a delegation and you want to make a presentation and submit material. So that's a little more intrusive, I guess. And so I would support them being able to participate electronically. For the public, they're going to get a video stream and newspaper coverage. So,
yeah, that's fine. I guess the proposed wording that I have is just that if they want to come at the 22nd meeting, maybe then the next meeting, which is next week, that we actually finalize how we want to do it, I guess, because the only thing I'm not sure is if we need to also change our bylaw to accommodate that.
okay.
That's the question, because I don't think our bylaw says that we can have electronic delegations, just like it didn't say we could have electronic participation. So I don't know, and maybe the few days gives Jackie a chance to maybe check and see what some other municipalities are doing and how they're handling it, that's all. That might be the perfect, that's fine resolution. I just don't know that we need to decide it exactly today. Maybe just if we give the date of April 8th to come back with the recommendation of how we're going to do it and whether we need to change our bylaw.
Okay, so can you summarize that?
So
amendment?
the proposed amendments are that the first one, that staff be directed to provide notice to the public that attendance at council meetings is not possible due to the closure of municipal building, and to provide information on the process to access council proceedings. And that staff provide a recommendation to council at the regular meeting of April 8th regarding changes to the process for public input to council agenda matters and any required revisions to section 10 of bylaw number 53, 2014.
All right, we've got any seconder for that amended motion? Reeve Doncaster?
And can I speak to it?
Yes.
So
You're on.
I'm just trying to think of how to do this because now we actually have that motion on the table.
Can everybody hear Reeve Doncaster?
Yep.
Yes,
Is it okay?
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Do you want me to yell?
Mute button on your box there.
So my thought, the only issue I have with it is the wording around you can't physically come to the meeting because the town hall's closed. We could be in an emergency situation where the town hall isn't closed, but we're going to have an electronic meeting. So I don't know that because the town hall is closed is that important in that.
Fair
I
enough.
mean, we might be in a declared emergency. I'm just trying to think of a scenario. We could be in a declared emergency and we have to have a council meeting today and 5 of us are out of town. So then we could still have a council meeting.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Really require the
it
town
doesn't
hall.
it doesn't require the town hall be closed.
Councillor Hughes, are you willing to?
I
amend
guess,
that?
I don't know, Jackie, our amendment in this case is specific to this emergency. Is that
That's
my
correct.
understanding?
Yes.
So this only will, so once this emergency is over, this amendment about electronic meetings will disappear. We may want to introduce it again in a different way because we're allowed to. But the way we have in front of us now will disappear when this emergency is over, is my understanding. So in this case, it does apply.
Any declared emergency.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was the case here.
No, it's any declared emergency. That's what the legislation allows us to do.
Oh, okay, okay.
Correct. It will stay in the bylaw as a provision for during a declared emergency to have the ability to do electronic meetings. It will be in the
During
bylaw.
a declared emergency, and it could be a municipal or a provincial declared emergency. So
Yes.
when I read it, that's what I read, during a declared emergency.
Okay, so I guess the notice about whether they can come into the meeting is not in our bylaw. It's just an information notice that we should put up somewhere that says, please don't try and come to the meeting. This is how you can get it. It's only the second one about delegations that affects our bylaw. So I think it's worth telling them that no, in this case, you can't come in. If we had another emergency 3 years from now, we would put up a different type of public notice saying what the conditions are. That's just a public notice. See what I'm saying? Like that doesn't affect our bylaw.
Councillor McLaren?
If someone wants to do a delegation, can Jackie connect them from their home on their laptop or whatever they want to do? And they do their delegation, and once they're done their delegation, Jackie signs them off. Nothing to do with the municipal office, nothing to do with anything. They're doing electronic delegation from their own home. And Jackie, can you have the ability to connect them?
Yes, they would sign in at the beginning of the meeting, or I could invite them at some point during the meeting. And then I have the ability to remove them from the meeting.
Simple. So we send out a notice, that's how we're going to do these meetings and move forward.
So I think the only difference is that Councillor Hughes is, because that requires some more wording to the procedural bylaw amendment, she suggests bringing forward that next week as opposed to tonight, because it's not part of the amendment before us regarding the delegations. Correct, Councillor Hughes?
I think that would be correct, just to make sure if we need, maybe we don't need to change the wording, but we should probably look at it. That's all. I mean, it sounds like we're in agreement as to what the process is going to look like, but let's just, I guess, approve the whole thing as a complete package on the 8th if we need to make changes to the bylaw as well. And I'm happy to get rid of the wording, just change the first one to say that staff be directed to provide notice to the public on the process to access council proceedings.
Well, I definitely think we should approve this bylaw because it makes this meeting legal.
Yeah.
So I think we have to approve the bylaw that's here tonight. And if it's an amended bylaw next week to specify how we take delegations, then we do that next week. But noting that we do have a delegation tonight on this meeting, so.
Sorry, I'm not
So
sure.
I'm good either way. We either include the wording on delegations or we do that next week and amend it again next week. Clerk Hughes, what would you like to do on that? Or not Hughes, Mellon, sorry. Do you have a suggestion or a comment? Let's move forward.
I believe Bill 187 was specifically to allow council to hold electronic meetings, and included in that meetings are going to be delegations. So I think that's covered, really. It was to provide for council to have meetings where they couldn't participate in person. So when we have an electronic meeting, we're still going to perform all of the items that are in the agenda. We're just going to be doing it electronically, and that would include delegations.
Okay, can I suggest then we approve the motion before us with the amendment to direct staff to inform the public how to access information, and that council asks staff also to review the need or not for us to amend the bylaw further to allow electronic delegations. But for now, we approve what we have.
Okay, so that would be that staff provide a recommendation to council at the meeting of April 8th regarding any required revisions to section 10, which is covering delegations of bylaw. So all they're doing is just whether all the motion now says is whether we need to make any changes to section 10.
Okay, and we may or may not, depending on what the clerk.
We may not. I mean,
All right.
that was a big part of the discussion at this webinar that they suggested we needed to look at. So,
Reeve Doncaster, did you have something to say?
No, just that we have a motion, we have an amendment moved by Councillor Hughes, seconded by myself. So we should vote on that first. Then we should vote on the original amended resolution.
Okay, and voting on the amendment that you and Councillor Hughes have endorsed includes the reference to section 10, correct?
correct. And
10?
the notice to the public about how to access meetings.
All right, so all in favor of that amendment with those two amendments? All right, that's carried. I see everybody. Yep, Councillor Fitton. All right, so that's carried. Thank you. Do we need another vote on anything else there? I think it's.
Yeah,
I think
so
we're
now
good.
the amended motion.
Okay,
Motion as a whole, yeah.
yeah, all right. Now so we're going to call a vote then on the amended motion as a whole. All in favor? I see everybody's hands. Thank you. All right.
Will that be the same?
That's passed. Pardon me?
Sorry, and do we have the same mover and seconder for the amended?
No, the amended motion was myself and Councillor Fitton.
Okay, thank you.
Fitton. Sorry.
The original motion was. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, now, moving on to the zoning bylaw amendment. So can we have a mover for that amendment? Councillor Fitton and Reeve Doncaster, please. And if you don't have it in front of you, somebody who does can read it.
Moved by myself, seconded by Reeve Doncaster. Be it resolved that the presentation to council by Brian Whitehead, Principal Planning Services with JP2G Consultants, Inc. regarding the draft zoning bylaw update be received, and that this item be referred to the April 8th, 2020 regular meeting of council.
Thank you. So we've got that on the table. We have Mr. Whitehead on our call, and I think Mr. Whitehead has given a letter as well, of a summary of the comments or the major changes, I guess, that were proposed. So Mr. Whitehead, would you like to, I know there were quite a few things, and I know you don't want to go through the whole bylaw, and it was up to us to read some of this. So do you want to go through the major points you wish to make and then answer questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor Dion.
Thank you.
Members of council, it's a pleasure to be on the first video council meeting, the first delegation, if you will. I'm joined tonight in my office by Catherine Curry, who's a planning intern. And Catherine's been helping out quite a bit on this assignment. And she's sitting behind me in an appropriate physical distance away. A lot's happened since I last met with council on December 10th. That was the public meeting for the comprehensive zoning bylaw. This is a brand new zoning bylaw. It'll repeal your current bylaw and become a new zoning bylaw for the town of Deep River. So at the public meeting, we didn't have any delegations, but it was decided that we would, council would extend the time period for submissions to early January. And total, we received 5 submissions from 4 people and a total of 56 comments. So we reviewed all the comments and we prepared a chart that's a draft chart of comments and recommendations. And I did have an opportunity to speak with at least 3 of the people who made written submissions, just to make sure that I got any clarifications or ensured that there was some clarity on what the concerns were. And I thought they were useful discussions. So based on those meetings that I had with those individuals, I revised the draft public comments, or the comment table and recommendations, and we had a technical team meeting on the 20th of February with Robert Lab and Jackie Mellon, myself, and Catherine. And based on that, there were some additional modifications which were covered in the letter. The covering letter that I submitted, they're more minor in nature. I won't get into them in detail unless council has any questions. And then we followed that technical team meeting with the submission that's before council that was submitted February 27th. And of course, since then, there's been a lot's happened since then. I'll just leave it at that. So the package that's before council basically has a copy of the draft bylaw. It has, of course, the zoning map as well that's been modified and updated. Copy of the signed open house sign-in sheet. A copy of any, it says public and agency comments, but we actually didn't receive any agency comments. And then, of course, the chart with all the comments and recommendations. But mostly throughout all this process, I've narrowed it down to 2 issues I feel that require council's input before the bylaw is finalized. The first is small nuclear reactors, and I'm sure everybody has heard of them, and I know there's a lot of research going on in this field. It did come up in the official plan review process as an opportunity, but that was back in, I guess, 2016, 2017. There are objectives in the goals and objectives section under the environment and climate change policies that more or less give some initiative or potential initiative as renewable energy type initiatives, but there really isn't a lot of, how can I put it, detail on how these facilities should be located. So there's quite a range of options available to council, and I don't know when this will happen, or it's sort of like a provision that would recognize them. Certainly we would recommend that there be a definition included in your bylaw of what a small nuclear reactor it would be, and we've prepared a definition, a very simple one, and I'll just read it quickly. SMR, or small nuclear reactor, means a nuclear reactor regulated by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission that generates less than 5 megawatts of electricity for the purpose of supplying electrical power generation into electrical grids. Now, this definition was created in part from us reviewing the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission's website. And on their website, it says that SMRs are actually, I believe, around 30 megawatts, or maybe even higher than 35, under 300. But through discussions with the technical team and actually it was decided that reducing it to 5 megawatts would be more appropriate. And if anything is bigger than that, it would require an amendment to the zoning bylaw. So these would be small nuclear modular reactors. So part of the reason for bringing this forward also is that it hasn't been part of the original bylaw that went to the public or has been circulated to the agencies. So really, you know, if council is comfortable, and just in context, if a proposal for an SMR does come forward, I would think that there'd be a considerable amount of environmental assessment review for one of these to be brought forward. So, but to be honest with you, beyond that, my knowledge level personally of SMRs is a bit limited, and I don't really have a budget to do a lot of research on them, but I have enough planning knowledge to provide you with options on how you might want to consider them. The first option is basically treat them like any other public utility. In the zoning bylaw, in zoning bylaws generally, it's pretty standard that public utilities can be permitted in any zone without a zoning bylaw amendment. So we could define them as in the zoning bylaws definition section, and council could permit these anywhere, and treat them, you know, if you're putting in a gas line or a hydro line or any other type of utility or structure, you don't require a zoning bylaw amendment because it's considered to be in the public interest. So that's option one. Option two would be to define the zones in which they would be permitted, you know, whether they would be, you know, an industrial zone or some other zone. That's a bit more challenging because, like, which zones do you pick? But those zones would have zone provisions in them that would have separation distances from side yards and setbacks and such. And industrial zones would probably have the greatest setback requirements. And that would make them a bit more challenging to locate in an urban area, and probably trigger a zoning amendment, perhaps. Option three would be simply to include a definition in the zoning bylaw, but not list them in any of the zones. And to do that, what that would mean is essentially every time one would come along, it would require a zoning bylaw amendment on a site-specific basis. Or we could create a zone category that would be specific to SMRs specifically. So those are the three main options. Or another option would be, you know, define it in the zoning bylaw and actually adopt the comprehensive bylaw and have a separate zoning bylaw amendment after the comprehensive is in place. And that amendment would be circulated to agencies and the public for comment and considered as a separate amendment. So that option could be considered in conjunction with option three. So those are the three options, and it's a scale. It's a scale from, hey, you know, I don't think this is a big deal. Let's just accommodate them as a public utility to the opposite extreme of requiring everyone to be rezoned. And it's an element of, how you would say, control, how much control council feels they need to have over siting these facilities, and or if council feels it's in the public interest that they be just treated like a utility. So I'll leave it at that for the moment, Mayor Dion, on that topic, and maybe I can get some feedback from council on what direction they think we might want to go.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Whitehead. I will, I think it's better then to have that conversation now, and then you're going to move to the other items that you brought forward, right?
Yep.
Okay. I will have I think I brought this up in my comments, and a couple things. One, in hindsight, I think the definition I should have recommended, or the thing that I should have identified we were looking at, is technically a VSMR. It's a very small modular reactor, and those do align with the power ratio that you've included in your definition. They are technically called VSMRs, and I have been at a couple conferences lately with the REEB, and that seems to be the industry common language for those. So I would suggest that if we are talking about it or defining it, we don't want an SMR that's 300 megawatts or anything like that. So these are VSMRs. I guess from my point of view, if any town is going to support and accommodate a VSMR with appropriate official plan and zoning bylaw policy, it should be Deep River, or, you know, there's a few others that would. I can tell you that both Clarington and Pinawa, Manitoba are actively out pursuing VSMRs to be located in their communities with vendors. So when you're talking about a VSMR, you're talking about a very small scale technology, similar to like a small switchyard or a small sort of gas plant for a hospital or something like that. So I guess it was my feeling that they be treated like a utility because they were small. I get that they're novel and they're a little bit groundbreaking, but ideally I kind of saw them as being treated like a utility, like we would treat our switchyard on McElligott Drive, for example. I'm open to the other ideas too. I just think that as long as we have language around them, and we do have a strategic plan and official plan, which both includes language about it. The official plan states the town will be a pioneer in alternative and renewable energy sources. And the strategic plan says Deep River will pursue the town's interest in collaborations with CNL that promote Deep River as a model green sustainable community through piloting of innovative technologies such as an SMR, maybe better worded as the VSMR. And on December 18th, 2019, Deep River Council unanimously passed a resolution supporting the three premiers' deployment of SMRs in their efforts to reduce greenhouse gas and explore innovative power technologies. So I do have, I guess that's where I'm at. I think of any community that is open to this, it would be Deep River, and that in order to do that, we have to have fairly friendly policies around it. So I don't know if there's other comments on that, but that was mine. Reeve Doncaster.
Thank you. I was just checking, see if I was muted. So that's what I found when I read the letter, and then further on in, I think in the document itself, I thought that the 5 megawatts was actually too restrictive, and then later on in the document where it mentions the 30 megawatts, I still think that's too restrictive. And also, contrary to what the mayor just said, I think the phrase SMR includes VSMRs, but I think if you use the term VSMR, that excludes SMRs. So I'm not sure why we would limit it to something, and my thought around it was, I mean, pick a number, but you know, the definition could be, you know, anything under 100 megawatts. And I'm not sure, Mayor Dion, why would you say we wouldn't want a 300 megawatt reactor? I don't know, but.
The comments that I was making were around making the town, without going through a big zoning or official plan amendment, open to a very small modular reactor.
Yeah.
I do believe if you have a large reactor, they are large and they would be more intrusive, and they are not just like a local utility. So they potentially would require a zoning amendment, potentially an official plan amendment, depending on the size and scale. So that was why my intent in making that comment in the zoning bylaw at all was that we have the flexibility to actively go after VSMR vendors. I wasn't really thinking of the big guys, and that's why I made the comment.
But it shouldn't be, I think, and sorry if I might, you know, there's some proponents out there that are at 15 megawatts. So, and they're still pretty small. So, I mean, if we were to put a limit there on VSMR and 5 megawatts, then we're looking at a zoning amendment because we didn't include that. So I'm just trying to be not too restrictive on that and leaving it a little bit more wide open. I think that even the 15 to 30 megawatts, they're still talking about, you know, not a large piece of property, like a you know, 1 or 2 lots would probably do it. And I would agree that I think the option 1, where we classify these as a public utility, would be certainly the way to go. And then it doesn't restrict what and where they can go. However, it might depend on what it is. So if it was, you know, less than 5, you know, you might stick it, you know, beside the community center. But if it was 30 or 40 or 50, you know, you might want that, you know, separated from a residential neighborhood. You know, so anyway.
Councillor Myers, he's got his hand up, so we'll listen to him. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I would agree. I'm not sure why we would specifically limit it to 5 megawatts or less. Could we not even expand the definition to include references to both, to say small modular reactor or very small modular reactor, or 2 definitions, or whatever? I certainly agree with making our provisions friendly. I guess I'm wondering too, though. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how the licensing is supposed to work, but I assume that they're going to be subject to an extensive any proposed SMR, VSMR is going to be subject to an extensive licensing process. So I'm not sure how much regulation we need in advance until the Nuclear Safety Commission actually specifies what, as far as trying to create setbacks or anything like that. I mean, really, we could do that, but I think overall that's going to be not out of our hands, but I mean, we're going to need, anybody proposing that is going to need guidance from the Nuclear Safety Commission. Ultimately, they're going to make the decisions about the siting requirements.
Thank you. Any of the other councillors? Councillor McLaren?
Yeah, I'm not going to prolong on this. I agree with Reeve Doncaster and Councilor Myers that I don't think we should restrict ourselves to a 5 megawatt reactor. If we want to be a leader, I think we need to be open and listen to the proposals that are coming to us. That's all I have to say.
Okay, I think the audio was a little muffled there, but I think you're saying leave the wattage open in terms of size. Yeah. I will say, I think a VSMR is defined as 15 megawatts and smaller in the industry, but I can't guarantee you that for sure right now. Councillor Hughes.
I guess just a couple things. One question on sort of process. I had looked at this, but then when I saw that it was deferred for April 8th, I didn't actually go back and review it. So I misunderstood, I guess, what was happening tonight. So I don't know if we're actually deciding on that option or not tonight, or if that's on the 8th. But I mean, I guess I have a little bit of a concern.
Sorry, I think we're just giving direction.
So I have just a little bit of a concern that this would go ahead without any further public consultation. I have no problem personally with this, but I think it's, you know, you just, I don't know. There will be some challenges about this. This is not going to be 100% supported. And I guess I just want to, you know, not set ourselves up for making this controversial right off the bat. I mean, I don't know why we would, I've put the definition in, but you know, just throwing it in and it hasn't been part of the draft all along, and then to approve it without further consultation or just leave it. And when we have one that we want, then it will be, I think as Councillor Myers said, there'll be all kinds of assessments going on, and deciding where we want to put it might be the best time to, you know, make that decision at that time rather than just, I don't know. I'm just a little concerned about putting it in there now, and it hasn't been part of the draft all along. And I just don't want to set us up for having this become controversial before we're even off the ground. And I don't see the disadvantage in waiting till something comes up, the opportunity. We've had a chance to really promote this as a great thing. And then the zoning and where we're going to put it is done at a time when there's, you know, we've already put the effort into building a lot of community support. That's all.
Thank you. I will just add that this is the zoning bylaw process is a public process, and in drafting a zoning bylaw, that's why we allow for comment and public reviews. So these are comments that I put in, and they do reflect the town's interest in pursuing alternative, piloting alternative innovative technologies for power. So I'm not concerned about the original draft of the bylaw didn't have this in, so we can't include it. That's what this whole purpose is about. However, I am concerned about, as Councillor Hughes is saying, making something a mountain when it's really a molehill. And so that was why I was really, I do really only encourage, if it was going to be treated as a utility, that it would be a VSMR in my opinion, and that an SMR would require a bit more planning approvals because they are larger and more intrusive on the landscape. So that was, I'm not saying we could have definitions for both, but I think if one was to be included as a standard public utility, in my opinion, it would be a VSMR, because something that's bigger than that, in my opinion, would require more planning review in terms of its location. It would be more intrusive on the landscape. So that's my thought on it. I don't know that that's giving Mr. Whitehead any direction. We're sort of around the map on this, but we do want to, I want to be able to bring the bylaw next week for approval. So ideally we do get on some common page or some common ground on this. Any further comments on this? Reeve Doncaster?
So just to be clear, and perhaps we could just get consensus with everybody, would it be, would everybody agree that we could go with the wording slightly as it is? So a public utility as it is, as the wording is, and we use both terms, VSMR or SMR, less than 30 megawatts. Is that acceptable to everybody?
Councillor Hughes?
Okay, again, as I said, I'm obviously a little caught off by, I assumed this was going to be deferred. That the discussion. So that's my misunderstanding of the agenda. But I will tell you, I had thinking it was going to be referred to next week, no discussion this week. There were things that I wanted to look into more. And to me, off the top, and this is just, me not knowing, when I see public utility as an option, I see that my initial reaction to that was, oh, that's a quick way of getting it accepted. And I'm just concerned that, and I don't know, that might be wrong, and I wanted to get some more information. So I guess I'm just a little more concerned about the perception of, possible perception of what this might look like. So that technically I could be way off base. Public utility to me meant, oh, that's a way of slipping it in. That's kind of how my first reaction was, right or wrong. That was my reaction. It seemed the least restrictive of trying to get something that may have some controversy associated with it, that I think we need to also think about.
In terms of Reeve Doncaster's question, I would suggest maybe both definitions could be part of the zoning bylaw, SMR and BSMR. In terms of how they're treated, it sounds like that there isn't necessarily consensus on that. So perhaps we look at option 2, which is a zoning bylaw amendment. That said, that doesn't put us in an advantageous position in dealing with or competing against other communities which are also looking for these types of initial prototype pilot installations. So I'm good either way. I do think both definitions should probably be part of the zoning bylaw though. And I believe there are industry standard definitions for both right now. So thanks. If there's no more comment on that or discussion, I'm going to get Mr. Whitehead to move to his next item of discussion, please.
So just on that last point, Mayor Dion, do I have any direction for the bylaw to be submitted to council on how to handle this for your next meeting? Do you want me to draft the 2 definitions with VSMR up to 30 megawatts and MSR? Or is it sort of tabled for now?
I think there's consensus the definitions should be in the bylaw.
Okay.
And I think if we can get you the definitions, I'll try and look into that for you. If you,
sure,
I can probably get that. Beyond that, it doesn't look like there's consensus that they be included as a public utility. So it looks like we would have something where it required, they're defined and they require zoning bylaw amendments.
Okay.
So, if I might.
Reeve.
So, I don't know how you're gauging consensus on not including it as a public utility.
Well, we have a vote. I personally think it would be, we would be hard pressed to define an SMR as a public utility just to put it anywhere because they are substantial in size. So that's where I think there is a scalability issue there, and it depends on what you're putting forward as being. If I would definitely support a VSMR being a public equivalent to a public utility, but an SMR technically could go quite large, and I don't think that would be appropriate for the town to just put anywhere. So that's, but I get your question is like, how are we gauging this consensus? So I didn't see any objection to having the definitions in there. I'm not getting that. I do see that there's concerns with how we treat them. And I see Councillor Rochon has also raised her hand, so we'll get your opinion, Councillor.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I was wondering if it's industry standard to have the SMRs labeled under utilities. Like, is that what everybody else does? That was my question.
You want me to answer that, Mayor Dion?
Sure, go ahead.
Part of the reason for bringing this issue forward with council is that I don't have a lot of information available to me at the moment within the scope of work for this project to do a lot of research into the planning standards that should be considered for citing an SMR. So it would, you know, if we were looking at this as a separate amendment to the bylaw, there would be a planning report that would do all the research, you know, of the industry standards. I don't know if there is a lot of. We did some research on SMRs and couldn't find basically anything where any municipality has implemented anything. Not that they're not out there, but we just didn't see anything. So this is pretty
They
new
aren't
stuff.
out there.
Well, they may be out there, yes, but so we just thought it was something that needed a bit more consideration, and so that's why we brought it forward that way, the way we have.
Councillor Rochon? Question
Yeah.
still? Okay.
Did you say, Mayor Dion, that we would be at a disadvantage if we had to amend our procedural bylaw, if we had to amend our bylaw every time there was a possibility of getting an SMR?
I think my opinion is that any municipality is likely going to need a bylaw amendment to accept it, an SMR or a VSMR. And just because they're new, right? They're
Oops,
Hello?
we lost the mayor. Do we have Jackie?
That would be our fine internet.
I'm still here. We're all
Okay.
still here. Mayor Dion froze. I'm not sure why. It's not showing me anything.
Okay.
I think we're gonna need her to sign back in.
Yeah, she's. We're down to.
Yep, she's gone.
Hmm.
Okay,
Okay.
well,
We don't have chair. Is that you, Reeve Doncaster?
yeah, I was going to say, in the
absence.
absence of the mayor, I guess it's
Call
me.
a short
So,
break.
yeah. Okay, how about we'll
Turn
take
the
a short break until the mayor can reconnect.
Okay, I'm turning video
Or
on.
I'm just going to put a resolution on the floor and we'll vote on it while she's missing.
I'm gonna pause the recording.
I'm recording.
Okay, so maybe it's showing me now recording again. So, okay. But we've lost Christina, Councillor Rochon.
Yeah, she may be having an internet issue too.
I'm gonna check
Okay.
602. Because I think I have to make a note that you left.
So did mine mine just kept trying and churning. Did you guys do something to get me back on or?
No.
No,
Okay, hers may come up too. She may call you, Jackie. I don't know.
I think I will see that she'll be waiting in the meeting room, so, and I can sign her back on. You just came back on, so I don't know.
Okay. So I guess the question was, yeah, I was trying to position us so we were in a position where we were more nimble to be able to, is Councillor Hughes, oh, there she is, be more nimble to
Oh, there she is.
go after these things. There's Councillor Roshan. So yay.
I'd check on my kid.
Oh,
So anyways, yeah, that's why. I'm happy if we have definitions. I'm more happy maybe if we allow them in certain, a VSMR in certain zones. I really don't think it's realistic to allow an SMR without going through a rezoning, just because they're going to be a lot bigger than a trailer, which a VSMR is. Councillor Myers, and then Councillor Fitton, and then Reeve Doncaster. Councillor Myers?
So just as a suggestion, if we're going to define both, can we not define VSMRs up to, let's say, 15 megawatts as a public, that the town would consider them public utilities? But that larger than that, I don't know exactly what the wording would need to be, but that we would need a site-specific zoning amendment for anything larger than a VSMR.
I'll
Sounds
support that.
reasonable to me. Councillor Fitton, you were next, and then Reeve Doncaster.
Yeah, that pretty much sums up my question, because I was going to say at the end of the day, if we can, for anything really, look, we want to be very inviting, but at the same time, if we have a significantly sized SMR, at the end of the day, we should still have final say as to where it's going to plop down, right? But I think Councillor Myers pretty much nailed that one.
Reeve Doncaster?
Yeah, thanks for that. That's kind of what I was thinking. The other comment I wanted to make was the fact that there will be, whether it's a VSMR or an SMR, there will be an environmental assessment on any of this type of technology. That's going to be a public process. What I didn't want to have is for any proponent of this to have to go through two public processes. One, the CNSC process and the environmental assessment, and a zoning bylaw amendment. So I think if we can demonstrate to the nuclear industry that you know, in some way, shape, or form, we're open to this and we have the ability to do this, that will position us much better than somebody else. Let's put it that way. So it's to show that we're, to take a phrase from somebody else, we're open for business, and it will be a public process. And if Councillor Hughes believes that she's going to make everybody happy on everything that we do, you're dreaming. So.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Hughes,
Sorry.
last chance.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really want to support this, right? And I agree, you can't make everyone happy, but I guess just the optics a little bit of going through all this process. We have a final draft, the draft is going to be put there, and all of a sudden it's going to have this piece in it. That's just the optics. That's all I'm saying. So I know we're in a little bit of a rush to get this approved. Is it as long as it's approved in the month of April, or is it earlier than that? Because of this new legislation that we're trying to get the zoning bylaw approved, right? In the month of April, because of, if we don't, something else comes into effect. Is that correct?
I believe there's Planning Act changes. Mr. Whitehead, can you clarify that? I think they start May 1st or something.
Well,
Okay,
there's a new provincial policy statement comes into effect on May 1st. I can say that it didn't discourage the provincial government from modifying the county official plan last Friday, and the county planners are busy trying to figure all that out at the moment. I don't know if that came up today at county council, but I don't see where that would adversely affect council's passing of the bylaw. I think the only legislated target that you have is a provision in the Planning Act that requires you to adopt and pass a new zoning bylaw within 3 years of when you approve, your official plan gets approved, and that 3 years comes up in later. I think it's August, or it's later this fall. So there's still a bit of time, in my opinion, unless somebody else has information that I'm not aware of.
I guess mostly, yeah. my only point on that being for the optics of having this appear in the final draft for the first time, and then we, you know, without, and I think that Mr. Whitehead referenced that in his letter as well, that the issue of this specific item has not had been part of the public consultation process. Can we just say that we won't bring this back until the second meeting in April? And if we make the decision tonight, then it gives them, you know, the public 3 weeks if there is anyone who wants to comment on this final draft. That's all.
If I may, Mayor Dion,
Yeah, please go.
if you wanted to go that route, it would be the option of deferring the passage of the bylaw for a week or two. But you could, you know, if you're open to it, put a notice in your paper. Like I think you have a section with notices, or a town section in the newspaper, NRT. You could just post it's not a statutory notice, but you've already had the 20-day notice period we had in December. So any additional notice does not have to comply with those time restrictions. You could put an ad in 1 week and then adopt the bylaw have it before council the following week. You know, if that's just an option.
Mr. Whitehead, would that lead the public to believe they could submit a whole round of new comments?
Well, they could certainly submit comments anytime up to the date that council passes the bylaw. And then if they requested a notice of decision, then it would provide them with an opportunity to file an appeal. But it would give them those rights.
Okay. I'm going to talk to regarding Councillor Myers and Fitton. And my viewpoint is similar, is that I would like to see the bylaw allow VSMRs as a utility. I hear what Reeve Doncaster is saying. I just think a full-scale SMR, which can be quite large, not only is it an environmental assessment review, there's also a land use review that would have to be done with that. So I really don't think in a small town that having that in any zone as a utility would be appropriate without a land use review. And I guess that's why I'm kind of personally, I see a division between the two, and the SMR requiring a more like a zoning bylaw amendment as well as its EA process. And I don't think, I mean, that just makes us easier to build a VSMR and then an SMR, but either way, we have both defined. And that's kind of I would like to see the definition or definitions in the bylaw and a bit of a distinction between the two types. One being treated as a utility and the other being requiring an amendment. But, and I think that's what I heard from Councillor Fitton and Councillor Myers. So do we need a resolution to direct you, Mr. Whitehead?
That would be helpful. And if the resolution could read that you're satisfied that additional public consultation isn't necessary, I think that should be included in the resolution.
Okay. So we do have a suggestion both to delineate the two types, and also a suggestion that we could put a notice in the paper regarding the town's interest in including VSMRs or SMRs in the zoning bylaw. What's the consensus here? I'm looking at council. Is somebody prepared to put a resolution or a motion on that? Reeve Doncaster?
I will do that. So if Jackie can draft a resolution basically that says that we create the definitions for both VSMR and SMR, and that the VSMR category, whatever that definition is, that Mr. Whitehead will come up with, will be classed as a public utility. And then the SMR definition will identify it as being whatever option 2 was. I'll have to find that.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Rochon and Councillor McLaren, are you seconding Councillor McLaren? Okay, we had Councillor Rochon first. Did that include Reeve Doncaster notice in the paper?
Yes, sorry.
A notice. Okay. Councillor, any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote on that. All in favor? All right, that's carried. And so now we can go to the next item. Mr. Whitehead, thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Dion. At the open house, the public open house on December 10th, we had a visitor. I think it was, well, there was two people on the same topic. One is John and Felicity Spears, and the other was Carl Turner. And their issue is with the unopened road allowance on the Pembroke to Mattawa road allowance. And I'll throw it out there. Does everybody know where this is? In the west end of town.
If anybody doesn't know, speak up and Mr. Whitehead can explain it. Okay, Councillor Rochon, if you could explain it then, please. No, Mr. Whitehead, do you want to explain that?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Well, I guess it's an unopened road allowance. It's what is it, Catherine? Double Dip Road?
It's from Double Dip Road to Thomas Street.
Double Dip Road to Thomas Street. And it was the subject, I guess, of some concern a number of years ago, but really, basically, it's an unopened road allowance that's used as a snowmobile trail. It's permitted under your bylaws for the use of snowmobiles. There is some history with this project. There was a subdivision approval and zone change for a small subdivision on the opposite side of the road allowance a number of years ago, about 30 years ago. And it was appealed by the Mr. Turner, I believe, and or it could have been John Spears actually. Went to a hearing, it was turned down. And because there is some buffering of a park between the subdivision and the and their properties, but basically there was an agreement at the time that this particular road allowance would have some barriers put up, and that was a commitment made by the mayor of the day, and that apparently was done. But since then, the barriers have been removed, and there's now snowmobiles using that trail, and it is a permitted use according to a snowmobile bylaw within the town. So I guess the options basically are, and when I was reviewing it with at the open house, there's two open space zones. One is like an active zone, and one is sort of more passive with pedestrian trails. And it was suggested to them that if that's what they would want, that would be the request that they should make, and that is what they submitted. So it's currently zoned open space 2, and they're proposing it to be zoned open space 3. But if you go that route, there should be a decision of council on how that trail should be used, whether it should be used as a snowmobile trail or as a passive recreation trail. I mean, that's the issue before council. So I think I could just leave it out there for any questions or comments the council have on that.
If you don't mind, I'm going to add a little bit more to that because I live over by that trail.
Sure.
And those are my neighbors who made that request, so I may not be in their good books after making my comments. It's part of the old Mattawa road allowance, which has been a historic road allowance for over a century, and it's that the trail is designated in the current official plan as a road allowance. It doesn't have a land use designation on it. And in the existing 2007 zoning bylaw, it's also showing up as a road allowance only. It doesn't have a zone on it. It just shows up as road.
Right.
And that would have been the situation when those landowners bought their property. there is a sewer that runs under that road allowance, and there's a walking trail, and primarily it's, I'd say 95% used as a walking trail or bike trail. In the winter, there are a few snowmobiles that do use it. And I know my neighbors are greatly disturbed by the snowmobiles that do go by. I will say they don't spend a lot of the winter here, but when they are here, I know that bothers them. However, there's the snowmobile bylaw in town allows for snowmobiles on these walking trails. And they do try to get out to the west end of town in the Gross Park area. And there's only 2 ways for them to do it right now, one along that way and one along Avon Street, the back of the homes on Beatty Crescent. There's a wide road allowance there. And it's the snowmobiles that go to the west end past Gross Park, it's about 50-50 would use either one of those routes. So by closing it or prohibiting it on the Old Mattawa road allowance, it would actually send all of the probably 10 snowmobiles that are there to the Beatty Road side. So then we may get complaints that way, I don't know. But anyways, I guess from my point of view, I do understand their concern, but I do think it is a road allowance, and it's the use is, from my observation, the snowmobile users are very respectful. They go very slowly. It's not heavily used, and I know I don't personally back onto it, but I just can't see it being that big an issue, especially when it's a long-standing historic road allowance. So in my opinion, I think it should be left the way it is. I'll open it up for discussion. So I did want to just add to that because I know that area very well, and I have spoken to Mr. Spears about it. Reeve Doncaster?
So I would agree that this was, and I don't remember exactly all of the issues, but this has come up in the past, and it was clear in the past. Whether that's true or not today is another conversation. But this was the use of these 2 routes was created or promoted and ensured that it was allowed to give snowmobilers access out of town without them being on streets, because they weren't allowed on streets. So that historically, I mean, that was how people could get in and out of town, to that part of town anyway. And I mean, the same conversation went along when there was that route that was created from basically the highway down to the downtown core. So, but I agree. I think it's without having a route, then we're not being open and friendly to all kinds of different activities.
Any other comments, or Councillor McLaren?
I think he's muted.
Councillor Marin, you're muted.
Well, Jackie has muted me
Can
then.
you turn your mute button off?
Where's my mute button? I think Jackie has me off.
You're on now.
All right. Yes, I agree with both the mayor and Reeve Doncaster that this trail has been established a long time ago. And if we start making exceptions for every little request that comes our way because we're inconveniencing somebody, well, I guess we would be handcuffing ourselves to make any decision. So I agree, we just leave the road as it is and move on with it. Thank you.
Thanks. If there's no other comments or questions, do we need a vote, Mr. Whitehead, to give you direction, or?
If there's no other negative comments from council, I think that's sufficient. There's no change to the bylaw. I have no direction to change the bylaw.
Okay.
Because right now it's OS3, and if you're not directing me to change it, it'll just stay the way it is.
Okay, I'll then put that back to council. Does anybody on council have a different viewpoint or wish to offer a different perspective? Okay, seeing none, then you've got your answer there, I think.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I think at this point, Mayor Dion, I'd just like to open it up to council if they have any other questions on any other matters related to the zoning bylaw or any issues or comments that are in the package.
Councillor Fitton.
Sorry, I just had a couple of questions regarding the storage trailer C-can or the storage trailer C-cans and shipping containers. There's a couple of bits in there that, again, they seem quite restrictive for the usages of such utilities or built. Well, I guess they're not buildings; they're just sea containers or storage. One of them was why we wouldn't allow a highway business to use them as a display. They seem like they would make quite a utilitarian display for them. The other one that I had a note on here was about if we're not, it was the limiting them, the number of them on a property, or as well as if it made sense to not be able to have them on your personal property to be used instead of whether you're purchasing a sea container or if you're purchasing a ready-built shed, as long as they're being equated into the total usage of the property. It doesn't seem like, to me, as long as it's kept up and in good shape, it looks nice, it's no different than building a shed or buying one of those ready pop-up sheds if it's in good shape.
Mr. Whitehead, do you want to explain what the proposed storage trailer C-can shipping containers bylaw allows? If you
Certainly. This is an item that came up at our last technical team meeting, and it's been an issue in some municipalities because you know, the people, they were, I guess, how can I put this? Commercial businesses just bring them in and put them down, and they don't necessarily require permits when they don't get permits when they do it. So what we did, we did some research and came up with some zone provisions and reviewed them with Robert Lab and vetted them through him. And it was actually, the recommendation came from your building inspector. So what is being proposed is a general provision which wouldn't say that they're not permitted. It just sets some provisions on how they should be located. So so what it does is it permits storage trailers, or what's called C-cans, to be permitted in highway, commercial, and rural zones in accordance with a series of provisions. And there's quite a few of them, but I guess I'll just review them quickly. So they're permitted in as I said, highway, commercial, and rural zone, and it limits the number of trailers or C-cans to a property to 3, and that they're not going to be permitted in the front yard. So if it's highway commercial and it's along Highway 17 corridor, it wouldn't be permitted in the front yard. And the trailer or C-can must be screened from view from street or any abutting zones, like other than a rural or an industrial or commercial zone. And what else? Again, so what it's saying is it's not that they're not permitted. There's a series of provisions in the bylaw to locate them. And let's see, and it restricts them from being used for the purpose of display or advertising, and as well as what else? And they can't be used for screening or fencing purposes, and they have to be included in the provisions for determining lot coverage. And what else is notwithstanding other provision, they shall not be used for the purpose of commercial storage facilities or mini storage establishments unless the property is zoned to permit that use. So that's just an overview of the provisions. And really it's just intended to prevent them from just being put anywhere. And I suppose they should be considered in the context of site plan control as well. I don't know how often site plan control is used in the town, but mostly that would be with a new development, I suppose. But in summary, the whole intent here is to allow CCANs, but to set up provisions to guide where they should go. So because in some cases they're not generally considered to be sightly, particularly if they're in a zone that's adjacent to a more sensitive non-commercial use or a more sensitive use. So it's sort of a long-winded answer, but it's like a whole page of provisions in the bylaw that's been added to accommodate the CCANs. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Rochon, did you have a comment, question? No. Anybody else have a comment or question? Reeve Doncaster?
Thank you, Your Worship. Couple, I think I had three fairly minor things. Oh, what was it? The first one was, so at the opening of the of the document, it's listing the CAO clerk. In the absence of a CAO, would we just have the clerk?
Reeve Doncaster, are you talking about the CCANs?
No, not.
Oh, could we just finish the CCAN discussion and then I'll go to you next.
Yeah.
Councillor Fitton, do you have any other comments based on what Mr. Whitehead has summarized?
No,
Have them allowed in the residential zone or something? Is that what you're looking for? Is that?
well, it does say, you know, they're in and around town. I think I've seen a couple of them, and if you purchase the really small ones, they make great storage sheds. So I just to throw the bylaw in with the rest of the stuff, I think the stuff around the CCAN rules that we want to put in place, if we're going to put in rules around CCANs, probably warranted a little bit more discussion as to what we would envision that for. They are a great way and an up and coming way for people to not necessarily save money, but potentially recycle resources that are out there when they're building little storage containers and stuff. Like they come down as small as what some storage sheds are out there was all.
Okay, I suspect that Mr. Labra brought this forward because he has some issues raised around sea containers on residential properties. I personally think this is pretty good. This allows them in highway, commercial, and rural zones. I'm surprised maybe it doesn't allow them in industrial zones, in a backyard and screened. And that way, CCANs, in my experience, have a very, very quick habit of turning rusty and not being very sightly. So this allows them to be screened and kind of so that people that don't necessarily have to look at an eyesore. But I would be hard pressed to say I would see them in residential zones without some type of zoning amendment, which made sure they didn't turn into an eyesore. But I think this is better than not having any provisions on them. So, and I guess I'm looking at Mr. Whitehead. Did Mr. Labrie bring this forward because this is one of his challenges?
Oh, yes, he brought it forward. I don't have a lot of context to provide for you, but he was pretty upfront about it.
Is there a reason industrial wouldn't be in there or other highway, commercial?
Well, I noticed that there's a provision E. It says, or actually it's D. It should be, let's see now. Should be screened from view from any street or abutting properties zoned in any zone other than rural, commercial, or industrial. So basically, if you're adjacent to an industrial zone, you can have them, but the general provision only limits it to highway, commercial, and rural. There aren't a lot of industrial zones in town, but I don't think it would be a problem to expand this to include industrial.
It just
That's
seems
right.
to be that there's something that would typically be used for that.
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah. If it's okay with council, I could review the bylaw and
Okay,
make a recommendation on which industrial zones should be considered.
okay.
But generally, I think you're right that industrial shouldn't be a good zone for that type of use as well.
Councillor Fitton, could I suggest that we start with this? All it requires then is that if somebody wants to do something in a zone that isn't one of these three, then I believe they would have to apply for an amendment to the zoning bylaw, which
That's correct.
probably would give a public review of acceptability depending on the situation. So it may not be exactly what you were thinking of, but it does give them the ability to make that application if they.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Like I said, it just seemed restrictive because, again, fencing them in or hiding them, it seems like it would be much easier for our bylaws to have them be kept and maintain good shape, whether that's painting them same as painting a house, because depending on the height of them, I don't think we're allowed to have fences that tall. So to fully screen them behind, I'd rather see something in there, but that would allow them. But at the same time, if it's kept up and in good shape, I've seen them utilized before as residential storage, where you wouldn't think it was any different than a garage because they were kept up and in good shape. But yeah, I guess it's a better starting point. It just seems to throw that into our zoning bylaw stuff that we've been talking about. Seems like it would be a bigger challenge, I guess, if somebody wanted to pop one down for whatever reason. If you needed a change to having them, it'd be a bigger deal to change that to a zoning piece than to not, but I guess not.
Anybody else feel strongly about this? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to go on to Reeve Doncaster, who had some questions or other comments on the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Dion. I was happy to know that I actually have a cellar and not a basement.
Oh,
Who knew?
congratulations.
Yeah, I didn't know I had a cellar. I'm wondering, so there was a fair amount of comments around short-term rentals, and I was just leafing through trying to find if it had been changed in the zoning bylaw for 30, 60, 90 days. I think now it's, in the existing one, it's 30 days. Has that changed? Because I can't find it.
It's actually been removed. The whole definition and provision has been removed.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the reason I mentioned that for council's information is that's one of the things that accommodators, so traditional accommodators, hotels, motels, that's one of the things that's an issue for them. The fact that anybody can rent out a room in a house with no zoning, with no licensing, with no insurance, and it's taking the business away from hotels. And this isn't unique to Deep River. This is going on all over, and it lends itself to the conversation about regulating Airbnbs and all that kind of stuff. But so that's the reason I brought the question up, because I wasn't sure if that had been changed in the draft bylaw. The second one I had might be a question for Mr. Patterson. The size of parking is being changed to 3 by 6 meters. Does that create any issues for us? Is that different than what we have? I think it's slightly larger. Does that create issues for, well, simply even just the line painting on our streets? And further to that, how many spots is that going to lose? And the reason I mention that is because when you get to, midway on Champlain Street, and pretty much around the corner onto Ridge Road, we don't have enough parking now. So if we lose 2 or 3 more spots per street, it's just going to make the matter worse. Parking is going to create more parking issues than we have now.
Mr. Patterson, do you have a comment on that? Is that you may have been the one to ask for the larger space size, I'm not sure.
Certainly, Your Worship, through you to council. We would have to go out and look at the particular implications of that. I can say that, for example, the one to Bean House Cafe and Service Ontario, for example, we have what formerly a cap spot there that is no longer, which is a wider than normal. So we would actually have to get out and measure those and build in each section to find out exactly what those implications would be. And I hope that answers the question, because I'm having some technical difficulty in hearing. So I think the question was.
Okay, thanks. I'll let Mr. Whitehead answer, and I would like to know how common that size is, because from my previous review of the sizes, I think those sizes are quite a bit bigger than any other town or city that I've looked at.
Okay, just for a bit of background, if I may. Again, this was a recommendation from your building inspector because of, but before I get into that, just a clarification that the bylaw is not retroactive. So any existing parking spaces in town, if they don't meet this standard, would continue to exist. So, that all your parking downtown, all the existing parking lots. The only way this would get triggered is if there's a change to a commercial development or a new development comes along. It would have to comply to these provisions. What I can say is it's an older provision, but the thinking is that in Deep River there's a higher number and percentage of larger vehicles than you might find in other municipalities that would have a smaller standard. In fact, like if you get into large urban centers like Ottawa, it's more for compact cars. And you'll see a lot of smaller parking spaces. In some municipalities, you might even see a blending of parking space types. But and just to follow up on Mayor Dion's comment, she's right. The typical parking standard now is the 2.7 by 5.5. So, but again, this is being brought forward from the technical committee based on recommendation from the building inspector. So, whichever way, if council wants to go back to the standard provision, that's totally acceptable.
Doncaster, continue.
So I would propose, I mean, I get the grandfathering, but even with new development, I don't know, pick something, a new grocery store on the highway maybe. It's one more thing that a developer has to stand up and say, it's hard to develop in Deep River because we have to meet all of these requirements that aren't standard. So my proposal would be we go back to the norm and leave it at that.
That's fine.
I would second that.
Okay. No problem. Done. Questions?
Does anybody think we need to vote on that, or does anybody feel strongly? I'm kind of on the same page as the Reeve. I think I don't want to put people through hoops because they can't meet our maximum parking capacity because our lots, our space sizes are too big, so then they have to shrink their building or something. So, okay, and Reeve Doncaster, I think your comment on the short-term rentals, I raised that in my comments on the bylaw. I was concerned that I know CNL hires 100 students a year, and a lot of them live in Deep River and they live in homes. So that was what I was thinking of when I raised that comment. And I still do believe that those students should be allowed to stay in homes while they're boarding here. So that was why. But I do get your point, but I don't think students would be using hotels anyways.
No, agreed, for sure.
Any other comments on the bylaw? I do have just one, Mr. Whitehead, and it's kind of repeated in several times, and maybe it was because when I made the question about having utility infrastructure as permitted in open space or open space zones or parkland, my thought there was so that it could be, you could have fiber optic cables or electrical cables or gas lines or whatever running through parks, buried or otherwise. And that's typically done. And so are they allowed? I couldn't really tell from the answers. It looked like utilities were not going to be allowed in those zones. Can you just clarify that, please?
Oh, no, that's not my understanding. I think
Okay.
these facilities are accessory to just about any permitted use, and they would be permitted as public utility anyway. So
Okay.
I think we're fine.
Okay. I think that was the only other major one I had. So I appreciate that clarification. So if there's no other comments or specific questions on the zoning bylaw for Mr. Whitehead tonight, I think we'll let him go. If there's, I'm gonna, one more time, anybody have a question? All right, seeing none, I will appreciate your discussion with council tonight, Mr. Whitehead, and hopefully you've got enough to bring something back. Oh, Councillor Hughes, you've got a.
Just going to say if we have made a decision on when we're bringing this back. I think the motion on the table is that this item be referred to April 8th, but I'm wondering actually now whether we are at our second option of
22nd
as resolutions where, you know, we actually are authorizing to proceed with the proposed amendments. In other words, the other option for the motion, and that we bring it back for approval. And if we say April 22nd, I don't know. It seems like that's where we are.
Yes, I would agree. I think with what we've given Mr. Whitehead to do, I think we're back here on the 22nd, because I think we agreed to put a notice in the paper as well. So,
right. It just sounds like we have two options, and the motion on the table is just to refer it. But it seems to me that we actually have made all the decisions we need, and that do we want to use the option that says we authorize them to come back with the amendments and for approval and adoption. That was another option for an amendment, I guess, but we have the other one on the table, the other motion on the table. So,
Reeve Doncaster, are you prepared to second that amendment?
So I was thinking, why wouldn't we bring it back in its final form at our next meeting?
Okay.
And then that can be presented to the public at that meeting. And then, and with the goal of actually approving it with any subsequent changes at the following meeting after that.
Sounds good.
Because then you're not just putting it out there at one meeting and approving it at one meeting. At least it'll span over 2 meetings.
All right, seems to make some sense. We'll do that. We've got 2 more meetings coming up. Does that give you enough time, Mr. Whitehead?
We'll make it work.
Thank you. All right, so we've got the motion on the table. Can we call the vote then on the motion that was on the table to have the presentation from Mr. Whitehead, and have the item referred to the April 8th, 2020 regular meeting of council. All in favor? All right, that's carried. Thanks, guys. Next item was the Deep River and District Hospital. Oh, bye, Brian. Thank you. I think I have lost my, hang on. Oh, yeah, I have. Not sure why how that happened. I've lost my agenda, but I'm gonna, here it is. Okay, item 5.3, Deep River and District Hospital request for childcare for frontline health workers. I did prepare that memo to sort of bring everybody up to speed on what was going on or had been going on. There is a meeting that I've been invited to for tomorrow, and I expect Mr. Patterson is invited to it as well, I think, where the hospital is calling people to, I think, a weekly meeting now. But on the agenda continues to be the town assisting them in childcare matters. So I've tried to summarize what the background is on that and what we've tried to do to date. I don't have any confirmed solution. I don't know if Reeve Doncaster has any update from the county that he wishes to provide. Certainly willing to open it up to questions on the topic. Reeve Doncaster, do you have anything that you are aware of? That
Sure. Not specifically locally, but couple of points. One is that this wasn't allowed, and certainly through the efforts of the mayor primarily, and advocating both AMO at the provincial level and FCM federally, that they did open it up. However, I think that the mayor and probably myself were disappointed the fact that the province turned around and allowed daycares to apply to reopen for the provision of childcare for essential workers only. And they did that, which is fine. But then certainly one of our local daycares, and I think the information has been distributed for a lot of very good reasons, was not willing to do that, which is their choice. But so the disappointment was, I guess, that the province didn't legislate daycares for essential workers as essential workers. And that would have forced some of the daycares to open up under strict rules and you know, guidelines and different things like that. So that didn't happen. However, both AMO and FCM are still on this. That is on the radar. If this issue becomes ultimately critical, that option is still open, that it could get legislated. So the county, so there was 2 applications in the county, one in Pembroke, one in Renfrew. I might have this backwards, but the Pembroke, the one that's opening up in Pembroke, I think is limited to 5 children, and the one in Renfrew has the capacity for 12 children. That might be reversed, I'm not sure. But I think that's the way it worked. So that's all there is. That's all there is right now. So,
can I just ask you if you're talking about essential medical services or essential or places that have been deemed essential?
So it was meant for emergency services. So fire, police, health, healthcare workers, including paramedics. So fire, police, okay, paramedics, and hospitals and long-term care centers is what it's meant.
So not Value Mart, places that have been deemed essential services.
No, emergency services primarily.
Emergency
Health services,
okay.
Health services and emergency services, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Reeve Doncaster. I wasn't actually aware that there were 2 applications in the county that did come in, so that's somewhat interesting. And I have not heard back from the college as to whether they were interested in pursuing it through their nursing or PSW student programs offering that service. I will do a follow-up with Jamie Bramberger before tomorrow's meeting, but I have no other update than that. Councillor Hughes, comment or question?
First of all, just thank you for a very detailed report. That was, and I know this has been an ongoing issue for a long time, and that was helpful to put a lot of the issue in perspective. I guess my only question would be, this meeting tomorrow is, I guess just with the hospital, we all call it Deep River, and I know that they have been sort of contacting you, but I think we also need to remember that in this situation with the COVID crisis, that Deep River is part of the county-wide response, in that it's, designated to be the hospital for overflow, non-COVID patients, that kind of thing. So for it to function well, will mean that our whole county-wide response is working. So I guess my question is, hopefully that the county, as sort of the child care overseer in the county, is kind of also involved in this and is working with the hospital as well, so that, to have some input in a process that's going to help the overall county-wide response. So is the county involved in helping you, is my question.
So yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
The short answer is yes. And it's continuing to evolve. So, the situation may change, and one of our local daycares may step up, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, who knows?
Also, I was going to say that at the meeting tomorrow and these weekly meetings, which I think they're weekly, both Laurentian Hills and Hector Mariah, Mayor and CAO are attending, and I have asked the hospital to include Mayor Sweet and their CAO as well, because they are a major user of the hospital, and they may have some idea of solutions in the Petawawa area. Since I do understand many of the current staff at the Deep River Hospital have daycare solutions provided through the military, like in terms of military spouses or something. So anyways, I have asked the hospital to include Mayor Sweet. There may be other options with medics and things like that. The hospital's concern is that the military will get posted out to maybe COVID hotspots, and then that will affect some of their daycare providers that their staff have. Sorry, Councillor Fitton, you had a question?
Yeah. One of the thoughts, concerns I had, I don't know if it came up in any of the discussions that you've had, and they're definitely probably relate more to Deep River specifically, that though we have two licensed daycare facilities in town, what are the extra hoops, or has anybody thought of what the extra hoops are going to be? Because both those buildings are located within school board buildings as well, so that may provide an extra challenge. If they're still not back in those buildings, how are those daycares gonna, even if we can get them open, can we get them open?
So the application process, the county child care group division, they advised that they were coordinating the applications from the child care providers, and the applications go to the Ministry of Education. So those are the ones who actually make the decision. So they also have authority over the schools. So that made some sense. But our local daycare providers have not wanted to come forward. I think they just see it as being very challenging given the rules and the health situation around COVID. So they have not come forward to apply. We need that put on the table, that update on the sorry, the update on the childcare. Councillor Rochon, could you move that and put it on the table? I screwed up again and didn't have it on the table before we started discussion. Do you have it there, or do you want me to read it?
Good. Be resolved that a memorandum from Sue Dion entitled Deep River District Hospital request to the town of Deep River to facilitate childcare for the frontline healthcare workers be received. that the mayor, Reeve, and CAO continue to dialogue with the DRDH and the County of Renfrew, the Renfrew District Health Unit, including Medical Officer of Health, and potential local service providers regarding finding a solution to the provisions of childcare for the frontline medical and emergency service workers, and that any childcare solutions proposed or facilitated by the town of Deep River have the endorsement of the Renfrew District Health Unit.
Thank
Good.
you. Councillor Hughes, I think you proposed a slight amendment to that.
Sorry, no, we're good.
We're good? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the motion on the table. Can I have any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, can we call the vote then? All in favor? Opposed? Nobody is opposed. Okay. Moving to the next item. Town finances, 5.4, town finances and potential COVID-19 financial relief. Mr. Arthur Smith, treasurer, and Mr. Patterson, you and Mr. Smith want to bring that forward. I think at this point you were going to give us a verbal update, and hopefully we have a formal written update for next meeting.
I'll just start by putting the motion on the table.
Oh,
Should I?
thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor
Please go
Rushall,
ahead,
be it
Councillor
resolved that-
Hughes.
Yeah. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Rushall, and be it resolved that the verbal report to council by Arthur Smith, treasurer, regarding town of Deep River finances and potential COVID-19 financial relief measures be received.
Okay, please go ahead, Mr. Smith or Mr. Patterson. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Council, the town of Deep River is in a very unique situation, as we were one of the few municipalities that had our first installment of our property taxes due before the crisis, due at the end of February. And our next due date for property taxes is not until the end of May. So most municipalities have been putting a delay on their property taxation for the due dates, have been extending it into April or May from the March 31st. Which is not a situation we are in. The only issue that we really are encountering is in the month of April, we normally send out the water bills for the first 6 months. And we have not sent these bills out, so putting a delay onto these bills would be very reasonable. I have been staying in touch with some of the updates from municipalities on measures, and most of the keys items are around delaying and not of property taxation due dates and the waiving of interest. But since, as I said earlier, our interest is all now for truly arrears, not for situation of a deferred penalty, it may not necessarily be prudent, as it would require both a change in our bylaws, actually any measure would require, and that our arrears are truly our arrears. The key is that with the water bill not going out, it does give us some options to provide some temporary relief. However, the county right now is not in a situation where they have been allowing municipalities to defer their payments, which we have made our payment for March 31st. And the school board ones are delayed to a later year. The key with putting delays into later in the year would be backloading a lot of payments into a very short window. Although it would provide some temporary relief, there may be some additional measures, but they require a lot more work and research, such as a tax deferral program for residents. And places like Toronto are looking into this, and it would be an application process based on a need versus a broad stroke thing. We are financially in reasonably good shape to weather the storm. If it becomes more than into the month of June, we might be in a different situation at that point, but we are in a fairly good situation, and our deadlines actually coincided very well with the outbreak timing.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Patterson, do you have anything else you want to add?
Certainly, Your Worship, through Council. I think the real key takeaways are this is going to develop slowly with federal and provincial relief packages in terms of what municipality. Mr. Smith paying attention to what other municipalities going through his associations and through touch bases with neighbors, and that it's a little bit too early to tell exactly what the most impacts will be. We're in reasonably good shape at this point, and there is no significant immediate billings going out that we can't fairly simply defer that water bill from April to June through a bylaw.
Okay, councillors, do you have any questions for Mr. Smith or Mr. Patterson on this? You also recall that we did get a note from a commercial or business ratepayer as well. Okay, Mr. McLaren, Councillor McLaren, then Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, it's not a question as much as it is a comment. I think some of the businesses that have been forced to close because they're not declared essential services, we need to look at some kind of a relief for them. Just throw it out there, these are businesses that are not operating as businesses now. Can they be taxed for the time being as they're forced to be closed as residential properties rather than commercial properties? I think that would assist them. The other businesses that are still opening, which they can afford their taxes, they're operating business as normal. I think we need to look at the ones that have been forced to close because they're not determined as essential services. The doors are closed, they're not bringing in revenue. We need to do something to assist these residents because they're the first ones to step up when we ask them for donations and whatnot. I think we need to step up and help them out.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. I see Mr. Smith was his hand up, so I imagine he has a comment or some feasibility item on that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Council. The key to this point is that the classification of properties is under provincial legislation, and that has not changed. So we cannot change a property from commercial to residential. To change the tax ratio, as in what they are taxed, is a county decision, not a lower tier decision. And the federal government and the provincial governments are working through their relief measures to help address some of these businesses. And they may change and expand the businesses and then allow for other options. But as of the point right now, we do, as a lower tier municipality, do not have the control to say a business is closed, it should be residential versus commercial. That relies on the provincial and government and their legislation, and the change of tax ratios would be at a county level decision, not at a lower tiered level decision.
Thank you for that, and I will hope that Mr. Doncaster, our RE, would take that back to the county for see what they're going to do.
Mr. RE Doncaster.
So thank you. The whole thing about relief for whoever, whether it's residences or businesses, tourist operators are being really hard hit. So that's being evaluated at the county for sure, and we'll certainly stay on top of that. What I would point out is, I think Mr. Smith probably said it best, that whatever we come up with, there may not be any urgency today, but whatever we come up with, deferral, not charging interest or anything like that, I think it's clear that it should be on an application-based process. I don't know what any single business, business's situation is, and so blanketly doing this is probably not beneficial. But I think that if moving forward, if things were to continue on for a very long period of time, then you may see some businesses that might ask for some help, and then that staff could evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. But I know that And I'll give you an example for, I'm not going to use myself as an example, but there's a lot of different businesses that a lot of the revenue that is generated, and I'm not talking about a retail store because that's pretty much generated today, but there's a lot of businesses that have revenue that is generated that you don't see for, 30, 45, 60 days. So the impact of losing revenue doesn't hit those businesses for 30, 45, 60 days. So it's this type of a situation affects every business differently. And that's why I think that if we're going to look at this, it should be on a case by case basis, and we'll have the ability, if necessary, to look at stuff. And there are a and it's changing, and it's the same with when you look at the correspondence that was presented at the beginning of the agenda. When this agenda was created, 3-4 days ago, there's been 5 or 6 updates to some of that information just in the last 3-4 days. And it's constantly changing. And some of the programs that the province and the federal government is coming out with, to assist individuals and businesses and corporations. I'm not sure they can go much farther, but how you access those funds, and I know that some of those funds, the municipality will qualify for some of those funds, whether it's wage subsidies or loss of revenue and all of that. So this is going to continue to evolve, and we don't even know how to apply for some of this stuff yet, but I think we should be open to doing something if necessary, but I don't think there's any urgent need to do anything today.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes, you're next.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I just wanted to clarify what, if anything, we were doing out of that. So with these April water bills, we're not sending them out, or are we delaying that? And the May tax payment, we're just going to wait and see what happens.
Councillor Hughes, I'll let Mr. Smith
Yep.
answer that. I think the intent was to bring that in a written report next week, but please go ahead, Mr. Smith.
The recommendation that will be coming forward would be to delay the water bills, as for a combination of us not having all the staffing on site, it makes it that much harder to generate the bills. And most of the extensions have been to the end of April or into May, such as Laurentian Valley's when they extended their March taxes, which may require further review. So it just made sense to move it, and then not to put it in May with the tax due date, but put it into June. For that reason would be the recommendation. And to review the May tax as we get closer, as one thing from MFOA and some of the other organizations is, unless there's something driving an important urgent need, to take your time and get it right, because then you'll have a better plan in the long run than constantly trying to put Band-Aids onto a quick fix.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, today, this is just a preliminary report, and we will get formal recommendations in the next meeting or so with specific measures that are proposed. That's the intent? Yeah.
Yeah.
Please go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Yes, so I will bring a report, just kind of reviewing what some of the options will be, not making any recommendation other than for the utility bill, as for it has the item with the most pressing timeline, and that we would be, again, constantly monitoring as everything is changing in the situation and see how their future deadlines evolve, and as we work on trying to create a better process for evaluation for relief within the constraints of the municipality required to have a balanced budget still in place. Our requirements for education may be deferred, but they are still in place. We still have a lot of limitations on what we can and cannot do.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm just going to say, I think it goes without saying, but I just want to make sure that when you're looking at whatever whatever recommendations you're bringing forward, I presume you're also looking at what federal and provincial options are out there for homeowners and businesses to deal with some of their revenue shortfalls, so that we know that we're not like double counting, right, in any relief that we give, but you know, they're also applying for federal or provincial program relief. And so we need to take all of that into consideration. Part of that, though, is making sure that our residents and our businesses are aware of what else is out there that they can apply for. I think Mr. Fitton, Councillor Fitton, do you have a question, or did you ever?
Yeah. Yes, I did. I just was making sure it wasn't doubled over. A couple of points are already talked about. I want to say, I think one of those recommendations coming through, even though our billing is beneficial to us, and you know, the municipality still has bills to pay as well, and you know, so all those businesses and residences, that's what makes us be able to function as well. I do believe that putting a pause on interest and penalties for the time being is important, even if we do recover from this by the end of April and can get billing as normal. All those bills are going to come due for everybody. Even if people have applied for assistance, there's been a delay on that. All that's going to be delayed in getting that cash flow back together. As Reeve Doncaster said, if you're in a business where you get paid net 30 days, but by the time you get back in business, you've been out of business for a month or two, everybody's going to be playing catch up at once. Just that relief of any interest or penalty, even on existing stuff that we've got going on, may be beneficial to our residents and our commercial consumers to know that at least they're not going to get dinged because they're playing catch up twofold, right? They're going to have the bill and they know they're going to be behind, but the bill is still there. Whether it's deferred or delayed, the bill is still there. You're going to have to pay at some time, but at least if they're not getting dinged that extra interest rate at the time the bill comes in, you know, we can do, they're may feel a little less pain. They can make their own payment options up, and you know, it may be a business saying, okay, well, I know my water bill has been delayed by, best case scenario, we're going to delay the water bill by a month. I've still got to pay it though, but I've also got the other one now that's coming up, or something else that's been deferred in the interim because of the being out of business. It may be beneficial, not necessarily hugely beneficial, but at least it's a little bit while we work to get the right kind of relief solutions in place more permanently. I think by waiving those interest and penalties.
Okay, I think we get that suggestion, and I'm going to ask Mr. Smith to consider that while he's thinking about his report for next meeting. Please, is that okay, Mr. Smith?
Yep.
All right, thanks. Was there anybody else that hadn't spoken on this? All right, seeing none, I'm going to say, can we all vote to accept the report from Mr. Smith on the financial update? We look forward to his report next week. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, and we need on a motion on the table, please, for the COVID-19 update from the CAO. Councillor Myers, could you move that forward, please? Councillor Myers, your mic is off.
Sorry. Good now? Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Fitton. Be it resolved that the verbal report to council by Sean Patterson, Acting Chief Administrative Officer for the Town of Deep River, regarding a COVID-19 update be received. Thank you.
Mr. Patterson, do you have something to say? I think my dog's going to start barking, so I'm going to turn my mic off.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to council, I'm going to try and keep this fairly brief, which isn't necessarily my nature. The first thing I'd like to touch bases on is we've kind of been working through a model of sort of business continuity plan. In essence, looks at a number of things. Initially, it was to identify services, to review the existing redundancies within those critical services, and to identify gaps in that. up the mitigation strategies, ensuring we maintain the tendencies. A lot of things in place to try and address that. So creative schedule to offset and separate both the primary and secondary person, complete one of those critical tasks or manage tasks. We've minimized staff levels to try and keep smaller circles of people, which will reduce risk. Staff screening for symptoms, staff education, communication with contractors. So there's quite a variety of different things we've put in place to try and reduce risk of losing or compromising any of those critical services. And lastly, we're also working with that work to develop sort of a we'll refer to a backup plan in the event we were to redundant. What would our next steps be in going through that process of keeping an eye? I'll touch bases in terms of the current staff. I'll speak just to our area. Challenges we're having is the amount of information coming out is difficult to manage, and some of it is accurate, some of it is not accurate, depending on what social media feeds you're looking at. At the end of the day, as of hours ago, 7 confirmed cases in Brantford County. Yesterday, Renfrew County declared a state of emergency, and also last night reported its first staff member from Mirror Lodge. That's a confirmed case. And just recently, actually, this meeting started. We saw a feed that suggests Petawawa announced their first confirmed case. Cannot tell you if that's one of the 7 reported by the county. I will touch bases in regards to our operation. As council's well, recreational facilities are closed that now include parks and many of our public spaces. Working on getting some signage out on sort of open-space park benches, long roads, things like that. That should be done within the next 2 hours. As folks are aware, we've put a limited access program in for Miller Road, so it's done by appointment, and there's nobody coming in, changing cash or using bank cards. We're doing it all through a billing system. We've been working with both Norlob, Laurentian Hills contractor to implement together a similar program for Bag Road, which is to be launched in the next 24, 48 hours with soft opening. At point, Bags Road, business as usual until that program rolled out, with the exception of some enhanced staff safety things they have in place, hand washing and physical distancing. We've implemented a food delivery program that we are providing food delivery services through the public department at this time for both Giant Tiger and Mart. This program, the uptake program, has been significantly increasing the last couple of days, and we going to meet tomorrow to discuss that and what our next steps might be after some communication with both of our owners. I will touch bases on the water plant as it's relevant to the long-term strategy in terms of COVID-19. Our water filter project did have a glitch in it. AWI due to fly here on Monday from Calgary. That got changed. Other contractor that they business with for 20 years was going to come from Calgary. They were flying in on Monday to start that and do the concrete this week. Unfortunately, we contacted on Sunday that because of concerns on closed provincial borders, they're not coming. We have since been working to a local or Ontario contractor, which we met with today, was on site today, and we expect to be able to them moving with it starting early next. So it looks like a 1-week delay, which still allows us the amount of time we need to get this. Will be a little bit closer, but we still should be in good shape there. The last things I have to touch on, as council are aware through the daily update, the TSH Montcalm project, which is scheduled to begin the beginning of April due to question marks around the construction industry relates to COVID-19. That is put on us for now, and Rob Labra in touch with Tim to watch how that unfolds and make decisions around inventory control. We're keeping an eye on our PPE, and we're doing what we can to try and help in any way we can with trying to order through different streams than the healthcare, anything we can, the hospital. I want to touch base quickly on the website. We are working on trying to make the website a bit more user-friendly, and that will relate to a previous discussion around the last report. So, for example, as and provincial programs are rolled out, we're going to, and we will continue to try and make it more user-friendly to have links to specific programs and how our community members access some of those, and small business access some application process, provincial and funding, as well as specific COVID information. I open the floor up to anybody might have. I have for my report.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Sorry, I had to let my dog out. That's why I left the view. And Councillor Rochon had to leave the meeting at 7-ish. Questions for Mr. Patterson? I know just in addition to what he's been giving us on a daily basis, that I know we all appreciate the updates. Any questions particularly? Councillor.
Just quickly, I mean, we are seeing lots of great comments online around the food delivery support that we're doing. But when you say it's increasing, I guess the question is there a concern that it's increasing at a rate that will make it not sustainable?
Good question.
Certainly, Your Worship, through you to council, that's what our thing is about. We have some capacity to expand this, but our concern is the rate of increase in it and its potential future. We need to look at other options, which have been consistently discussed since the beginning of it, which lead to potentially other departments or staff on standby, and actually the use of volunteer programs administered by hopefully Valmart or Tiger. But having said that, I need capacity to pack groceries and get to ship out is stretched to max also. So that's why I have some communication with them tomorrow and get their sense of where they see this thing going and what next steps we might need to prepare for any potential expansion of service.
Thank you. I think it's important to note the feds and the province have come out and asked people over 70 not to leave their house, essentially. So they're going to be more, I expect there's going to be more requests for next month. So we may need to look creatively at engaging other departments or volunteers or something like that. I can see that being a challenge. Councillor Hughes, do you have some other questions or? Anyone else? Questions for Mr. Patterson? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Patterson, for that update. Moving on to, we don't have closed session tonight. So I think we're at 8.1, which is bylaws. We have a bylaw, which is the amendment to the procedural bylaw. Councillor, sorry, I guess we have to vote on receiving the update from Mr. Patterson first, and then we'll move on to the procedural bylaw. All in favor of the report from Mr. Patterson? Receiving? All right, that's carried. And now could we have Councillor Fitton move the procedural bylaw amendment? 8.1
Certainly.
bylaw
Yeah.
20. Thank you.
So moved by myself, seconded by Reeve Doncaster. Be it resolved that the following bylaw be read the first, second, and third time, numbered, passed, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the seal of the corporation affixed thereto. Bylaw number 15, 2020, a bylaw to amend bylaw number 53, 2014, a bylaw to regulate the proceedings of council of the town of Deep River.
Thank you. All in favor? That's carried. Sorry, I didn't have discussion because we already had that. 8.2, which is a bylaw 16, 2020, and Reeve Doncaster, could you move that? That is the bylaw we need to appoint the CAO, interim chief CAO, please.
Certainly moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Myers. Be it resolved that the following bylaw be read a first, second, third time, numbered, passed, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the seal of the corporation be affixed thereto. Bylaw number 16 -2020, bylaw to appoint an interim chief administrative officer for the corporation of the town of Deep River.
Thank you. Any discussion on that bylaw? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote on that. All in favor? And that's carried as well. And on to the confirmatory bylaw. 9.1.
So moved by myself,
Thanks.
moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Hughes. Be it resolved that the following bylaw be read a first, second, and third time, numbered, passed, and signed by the mayor and the clerk, the seal of the corporation affixed thereto. Bylaw number 17, 2020, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council of the town of Deep River at the special meeting held on April 1st, 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Fitton. All in favor? All right, carried. And move to adjourn. Councillor Hughes, can you move us
Moved by
out?
myself, seconded by Councillor Myers. Be it resolved that council hereby adjourns the meeting at 7:30 p.m.
All in favor? All right, thanks, guys. That was a little longer than I hoped, but hopefully our meeting on the 8th will be a little shorter. So anyways, I do
Thanks,
appreciate
Jackie.
you attending, and thanks, Jackie, for setting all this up
Yep.
with Zoom and letting everybody practice. I think
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
I more or less when
I'm
we're
going to send out a daily update today.
we